Welcome to the Randy Burke channel. I am Randy Burke. Today, I would like to introduce to you, You Dummy, by Omega Fire 17. Having barely survived a near-death experience, Kirito and Asuna are shaken, and have decided to spend the night together at her house. However, what happens when it turns out they had entirely different ideas about what that meant? A very interesting night. Kazuto X Asuna. Chapter 1, Together. Sao, Ukrad. Floor 61, Asuna's house. Ah, that was some good eating. But even as he sipped his tea, he noted Asuna doing the same, rather stiffly he thought. And come to think of it, she'd been strangely quiet ever since they'd gotten here, not in the sense that she was unwilling to have him here, or mad, far as he could tell, just quiet. He wondered what was going on with her. Wait, maybe she was in some sort of shock? Well, I did just kiss her not a few hours ago, he thought, a little embarrassed, but it was still the truth. Asuna put her cup and saucer down with a small clang. Okay, she said, like it took a little effort, and stood up just as formally as before. He slowly watched her walk over to the light, confused, more so when she turned it off. And when she just stood there, looking nervous, he slowly tilted his head. Really, what was going on with her? Then she accessed her menu, which appeared with that pleasant string of sounds, then she clicked something. The result? In order, her boots, shirt, and skirt all disappeared in bursts of light, the pieces growing smaller and smaller as they flew away. In his shock, he made some sort of sound, but despite that, he still saw the shy beauty she was at that moment, ribbons and all. Don't look, she breathed, instinctively covering herself a little, cheeks red. Not yet anyway, she continued in a whisper, slowly looking over at him. He was still in shock. What are you waiting for? Get undressed. Don't just sit there. It's embarrassing. Gah. No wait, I didn't, he stammered, trying to say this honestly. I just gulp. All I wanted was to spend the night with you tonight, and he continued, really embarrassed. And not the other thing. Huh? The seconds passed by, each as heavy as the last. They could have heard a pin drop. You, why you? The moment her tone registered, he freaked out. He knew exactly where this was going. He was screwed. She turned toward him, half covering herself with her left hand, while the other formed a power fist. Equal parts embarrassment and fury showed in every movement as she hefted it. You dummy. She rushed at him with blinding speed, and it was only pure instinct that got him to move, launching himself out and away from the chair. It still wasn't enough. In shock, seeing everything in slow motion, he saw her power fist racing straight for his skull. Only sheer dumb luck kept that from happening. Somewhere during his trajectory, his foot tripped over something in the way, changing his angle just a little. So instead of smashing into his brain, her power fist grazed his cheek, sliding across it. The impact still sent him into the wall. Ah. Gahaha. He sat there, reflexively clutching at his back and cheek, even as the purple immortal object icon on the wall above slowly went away. Asuna was breathing heavily in front of him, fist still outstretched, hair hiding her eyes. You idiot, she breathed weakly, shaking, the fist falling to her side. You can't just say things like that and mean. You can't. He breathed out, looking up. Asuna. Get out. Plop. He gasped, not just at the tears he saw, but the sheer ejection/brokenness of her tone. He could only sit there in shock. Through a bad use of wording, she thought he'd meant spend the night, literally, with her, and despite being really nervous, she'd been fairly willing, and gone to a lot of trouble for it. And what had he done? Reveal he meant keeping her safe, and nothing more, even after he had kissed her and everything. It's no wonder she's so mad. He gritted his teeth after several moments. How could he not have noticed what he'd been implying? Seriously? For a while, he didn't do anything, then slowly got up, quiet. Asuna didn't move at all. No. She stirred. Kirito MMPH. He didn't see her eyes snap open, but he kept up the pressure, kissing her hard. Even as she gripped him instinctively, he didn't stop, feeling her tear streaks wetting his face. And when she kissed him back just as hard, He lifted her up, making her squeak a bit. With his strength parameter, it was easy to hold her up. Still kissing each other hard, Asuna kept her arms wrapped around him, as well as her legs. He didn't mind, not at all. In fact, he was starting to like it. When they broke apart, panting a little, her cheeks were red. Even not saying anything, he saw that she was happy, as well as confused. It took him a moment to find the right words. When it comes to romance, he started slowly, glancing away for a moment. "You're right, I am a bit of a dummy," she breathed out, fingers moving across his neck. "Kirito," she whispered. "I thought it would take a while, before we went from kissing to, well, spending the night together," he admitted, embarrassed to be saying it. "Perhaps that was stupid of me. Every day in here, we could die, and time is precious, whether in SAO, or in the real world." Her hand found his cheek, drawing his attention. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her own cheeks still red. He started to say, but then he stopped, surprising her. Then he slowly smiled a little. "Actually, it'd be better if I showed you," he said, nervous himself, but still bringing up the menu. He found his ethics code, which was currently on. Ding. His shirt and pants disappeared, joining his black coat in the midst of the unseen inventory. And much like Asuna's, his own underwear was the standard type, apparently, though he'd managed to find some black dye. She gasped, surprised at the sudden appearance of his bare chest, staring at him, but soon, the surprise was replaced by her eyes shining, and her lip curving. "Are you toned in real life as well?" she breathed softly, her other hand hesitantly touching a few spots. "Well, I did play kendo with my cousin, years ago," he admitted, sheepishly rubbing his head, "at least before there was a close call holding Asuna up, due to balance. I've since stopped doing that, so, maybe I let myself go and lost some of that tone." "Well, I don't care," she whispered gently, slowly kissing him on the chest, making him breath out a little. "It's you, and that's all that matters to me," she whispered, looking right at him. He smiled back, touched, then he began moving slowly, still holding her up. Asuna was a little surprised, but she held on to him closely. When she saw where they were heading, her face turned further red, and she looked nervous. Why wouldn't she be? He was practically the same, if not worse, despite how cool he was somehow playing it. She gasped a little when he got them onto her bed, on his knees, still holding her up. She looked at him, and he at her, slowly leaning forward. Even when her back touched the bed, they never broke eye contact. "Kirito," she breathed gently, but nervous. "You don't have to do this." He got closer. "I'm not just doing this because you want to, Asuna," he breathed, feeling something starting to come over him, and liking her little embarrassed gasp. "I want to," he continued, their lips very close now. To make you happy." She was breathing heavily against his mouth, her lips quivering, ready for their kiss, but he wouldn't come closer. "Kirito," she whispered, a little wanting, shivering when his fingers touched her hair. "What are you?" Her breath hitched when his fingers touched her braid, gently stroking it, and toying with the arrangement that kept it in place. Then he kissed her. After 5 seconds, they broke apart, looking at each other. He managed a small smile, and she returned it, her eyes shining. Her braid came undone underneath his fingers, the extra locks flowing down, joining the rest of her hair. "Kirito. Asuna." Their lips connected again. She shivered underneath him, fingers digging into his hair as their kiss went on, his own fingers exploring around her shoulders. She breathed out at this, then she held him even closer, and he felt his collarbone bump hers. He was further embarrassed when he realized her chest was pressed against hers, but he powered through it, lowering the rest of his body onto hers. She hitched when his groin pressed against hers, though gently, hesitantly, her legs soon wrapped around his, rubbing against him lovingly. "Oh," she breathed against him. "Oh, ah." He gently broke the kiss, both of them panting heavily, but he quickly got his wits back. She gasped when he kissed her neck, and again when he traced 2 fingers over her stomach, right over her belly button, rib cage, and ending on the small connecting section on the front of her bra. "Ha." She looked at him, nervously shy and panting, her cheeks red. He gently caressed her cheek with his other hand, which eased her shyness. He smiled at her, and it helped to hide his own nervousness. His first touch was gentle, of course, lightly tracing the patterns on her bra, and toying a little with the ribbon. She whimpered a bit underneath him, but he could tell that was just the nervousness, so he soothed her by kissing her cheek. And his touch remained soft as he experimentally squeezed, making her gasp, head thrown back, though slowly. And even over this thin fabric, he got the exact same sensations from their cliché crash into grope situation, soft and squishy, in a very good way. Still, it wasn't long before he moved his hand, going underneath her back even as his other hand continued the gentle exploring. Asuna gasped when his fingers chanced upon the strap, particularly the bit that kept it hooked together. Kirito, she breathed, shyly nervous. Sorry, he breathed, glancing down but not moving his hand. If it's too soon, I can just. No, she whispered back, making him gasp in surprise, staring at her. Her cheeks reddened even further as she smiled. You've always been an insane type of guy, she whispered softly, with a little playful in there. Even doing this is so much like you, and it suits you, Kirito. And I just want. She wouldn't finish her sentence, but when her cheeks reddened further and stayed that way, he slowly got it. He started to open his mouth to ask, are you sure? But stopped. What would be the point in asking the obvious? He kissed her, something she returned eagerly. How do I do it then? He whispered quietly, once they broke apart. Undo it, I mean. For a little while, all he heard was her panting, no doubt from surprise. He didn't want to bring down the mood by struggling, so he wanted to make sure, to make her happy. Her eyes shone the entire time, cheeks red. You only need one hand, she whispered softly, slowly sitting up. Put 2 fingers on either side. Like this? He breathed, doing so on the hook, even as she hugged him close, him returning the favor with his other hand. A little closer together, okay? Just push in, then pinch them together. He slowly did so, taking every care not to pinch her skin as well. When he did, he felt a subtle click. Then he released his grip, the now split straps coming with them, before slowly falling down a little. Still holding on to him, she shivered nervously, but he held her close. Asuna, he whispered gently, breathing against her neck. Kirito. He softly kissed her neck, making her breathe out in pleasure, then he gently moved the 2 straps. Even as the straps went down her arms, she had to pull away from him a bit, just so he could do so, and the moment they were gone, she quickly covered herself out on instinct. For a moment, he just looked at her, even as Asuna nervously fidgeted on the spot. While she did a good job at covering herself, what he did see still made his heart pound, and the smallest tip of her right nipple was peeking out. But after that moment, he moved closer, kissing her. While surprised, she returned it easily, gasping a little when he opened his mouth. Soon though, after she opened her mouth as well, he touched his tongue to her lip. MMPH. The way she jerked startled him, but after a few seconds, he figured she was surprised. But surprised or not, she was really breathy now, even as his tongue gently caressed the outside of her mouth. Seconds passed as he kept this up, then her hands caressed his cheeks. Which meant they were no longer covering her chest. She gasped in slight want when he pulled away from her, but before she could get a single word out, his hands had taken advantage of her no longer being covered. Ahaha. He groaned, both at the sensation under his fingers, and the amount of pleasure he got out of her moan. But despite that, he kept up his touch, gently stroking and squeezing her breasts, making her squirm. However, he didn't just work on them. He made sure to devote some time to her nipples as well, but though it was quickly lost in the moment, something weird happened. One moment, he brushed both of them with his thumbs, liked how her gasp sounded, then made sure to do so again more thoroughly. However, after that first touch, she seemed to have near instantly gone from soft-tipped to the harder, aroused state. Had she just been that into it, or did he hit a right spot by accident? He wasn't sure till later. Kirito, she gasped, then moaned again when he pleased her breasts, this time using his mouth, and all its uses. Ah. Oh hugah. Any sound she made pretty much became music to his ears, and this continued for a while. Kirito. By instinct, he stopped, gasping a bit. "Ah. What?" he breathed. Her hair splayed across the pillows, panting, cheeks red, and her breasts gleaming slightly from his saliva. Asuna nevertheless managed to sit up. "Kirito," she whispered, kissing him, hands touching his chest. "Don't do all the work yourself." It took him a little to gather what she meant, and even then, her hands on his chest suddenly became very cool due to him heating up. "Asuna, please." He immediately saw that she wanted to, all nervousness/shyness aside. "Okay." She smiled sweetly, then slowly lowered her head, even as her fingers traced his muscles lines. Her first action was to breathe against his chest, startling him, which she gave off a small soft/playful giggle at. She made sure to kiss him all over, mainly his abs, even as her fingers toyed around his stomach. She kept this up for a few seconds, before her mouth teased his nipples. He gasped, surprised at how good that felt, and something that encouraged Asuna to kiss him there, actually, make that kiss and, eventually, lick him there. And when this happened, he had another barely felt realization. One moment his nipples were soft, the next they were also aroused, though not quite the same way as Asuna's. He thought there was a brief pause, where Asuna must have realized this, but only for a moment. She kept up her gentle affection, steadily moving down his muscles, and making him breathe out at the sensations. At one point though, he realized that she had passed his stomach, and her kissing/licking affections were just barely above his. He gasped again. "Asuna." Her fingers hesitantly moved over the waistband of his boxers, and her cheeks were even redder, nervous. "Well, I just," she breathed, stammering a bit. "I'll have to do this sooner or later, right?" "Why, yeah, I guess." His eyes half open, he saw Asuna lower her gaze enough, then he thought she paused, which confused him. "Kirito? Why aren't you hard?" He blinked, then with a little jolt, quickly looked down, and was left staring. It was true, despite his pounding heart and the distinct heat all over, there was no bulge whatsoever. Aghast, he looked back at Asuna, and was struck by the tears in her eyes. "Kirito," she breathed weakly, arms slowly coming up, partly obscuring her breasts. "Am I not appealing to you?" He stared at her in shock for a moment, then he instantly pulled her in, complete with gasp, and kissed her hard. She didn't even have time to kiss him back. "Asuna, you're beautiful to me," he breathed, surprising her. "I know it's not my style to say, but you are. You're more appealing than any woman I've ever met. Being here with you, I feel like I'm gonna explode, in the good way." "Feel for yourself." To prove his last statement, he pulled her hand onto his heart, which was still fiercely pounding. She was heavily surprised, cheeks red and panting heavily. "Please, believe me." Her look softened, and she smiled gently. "I do," she breathed, before her eyebrows furrowed. "But, what about?" she started to ask, before she stopped, himself slowly blinking. Maybe it's the system? Huh? Her cheeks reddened even further, and she fidgeted, glancing away. The system pre-programmed every sensation, including this, she whispered, embarrassed, but still going on. "However, despite going at this for a while, you haven't gotten hard. Maybe it needs to be touched, for that to happen?" Despite his thought processes being hazy, he struggled against it. That would make sense, he breathed, slowly moving a finger up her stomach, and gently onto her left breast. She squeaked a little when that happened, toying a little with her nipple. When I brushed over this, it went from soft to aroused, almost immediately. I think the system did the same thing with mine. That noise was the result of surprise, her fingers digging into his waistband. Her cheeks briefly turned a darker red, and she was really nervous, but also determined. "Well," she breathed, taking in a breath. "Only one way to find out, right?" He didn't get a chance to answer. She pulled his boxers down, paused with a hitch when he came into sight, stayed that way for a few seconds, then she got over it, pulling them off all the way. And after she tossed it, she fidgeted nervously, before slowly looking back over at him. He found the ensuring silence awkward, and he rubbed his head, looking down. "Gee, go ahead," he mumbled, not sure what to do. "Say it looks weird, or something. You look cute." "Wait, what?" The disbelief must have been written all over his face, because she held a hand to her mouth, struggling not to giggle. "When you're awkward like that," she breathed softly, cheeks red, but smiling. "You look cute, Kirito." Nonplussed, he merely blinked. She giggled this time, then he hitched back to reality when her finger toyed with the skin near his genital. "You are cute, but I'm not sure yet what I think of you." "Down there," she breathed shyly, but determined anyway. "But there's no hurry, right?" Glancing at her toying finger, he blinked, but managed the nerve to nod. And with that, she slowly, hesitantly, moved her finger over his genital. It was simple, but already he felt like panting. For the most part, she stayed around his balls first, keeping only the tips of her fingers exploring. Then after a certain point, she jerked a bit, and moved on to the head, and seconds after she did, it was as if she flicked a switch, because it started twitching. His gasp tipped her off to that, and her fingers paused. Immediately after she did, the twitching slowed to a stop, but didn't go back down. Breathing a little faster than normal, he glanced at Asuna, who returned it. Despite their faces both being red, or so he assumed on his, they had a shared inkling. The system wasn't programmed enough for every facet of the real-life version, so it was connected to touch only in here. Well, maybe it'd still be good practice, at least. The moment soon passed, Asuna taking in a steady breath, then he gasped as she continued her exploration. Second by second, she shyly worked on his genital, every touch furthering the system's growing process, including the rising heat. In between his little sounds, and the sensations themselves, he caught a few glances of her expression, determination, shy nervousness, curiosity, and a lot of red. Asuna, he breathed, hitching slightly. "Why yes, how far are you planning to go?" He managed to breathe, groaning at the intensity. He was pretty close now, to being fully hard. With that, he quickly added, though a little raspy. She paused, worried, even as his genital finally hit the growth limit. "Kirito," she breathed, her other hand touching his fingers. "Do you not want me to?" He quickly got closer, holding her hand and touching his other one to her right breast. She squeaked a little, even as he kissed her. "That's not it," he breathed, panting a little. "It's more like, well, I want to get the main experience first. That way, everything else will be easier for us, the next time." She gave off a little gasp, but it was soon followed by a sweet smile. "Next time," she breathed, like it was a promise. "And it is," he thought, hazily, but still. "It is a promgar." To finish up her gentle exploring, she'd suddenly gone from a few fingers' touch to a grip, almost like iron. And when he jerked at the result, she giggled softly, cheeks red. Breathing out, he resolved to get her for that, kissing her fiercely and gripping both her breasts in his hands. She moaned at his affection, holding on to him tightly. And her moans only got louder when his groping turned into licks, throwing her head back. He kept it up, pushing her forward more and more, until finally they landed on her bed, her back to it. "Kirito." He had a small grin at hearing her cry out his name, then licked across both breasts, enough that she bucked at the sensation. "You know, you're a little bigger than I imagined." Shut up. Oh. And all the while, one hand was toying around her stomach, teasing the skin directly underneath, and above. Their kiss broke apart, due to the need to breathe, and soon they were staring at each other. Asuna glanced down, which he realized meant down her body, where his hand was. Her cheeks reddened, then she looked back at him, and smiled. "Kirito," she breathed lovingly. Relieved, he gently got closer. "Asuna." They kissed again, softer and gentle this time, allowing his hand to slowly move down from her stomach, right onto the waistband of her panties. Her body hitched at the contact, but he was careful, moving across her hips first, as well as teasing her tailbone, which she squeaked at. He also did his best to toy with the ribbons, enough that she started to tremble in anticipation. Eventually though, he moved both hands down to the waistband, still kissing her lips softly. She whimpered a little when his fingers dug in. "Be gentle," she mumbled, cheeks red. He lightly sucked on her upper lip, making her gasp. "Always," he assured. Steeling himself, he pulled her panties down all the way, Asuna instinctively lifting her legs to help after they got to her knees. Even as he breathed out, she whimpered a little more, glancing away. "Kirito," she breathed. "Don't look. You're beautiful, Asuna," she gasped, staring up at him, cheeks red. He smiled, inches away from her lips. "Come on, you are," he breathed mildly. "Even if I don't know yet what to think down there." A second of silence, then a small pout. "Don't tease me, Kirito," she whispered. He breathed back, then he kissed her softly. She breathed against him, liking that, hands moving over his back. After enough time had passed, he moved his hand, gently teasing the skin near her hips, which she gasped at. It's okay," he breathed gently against her neck, his fingers slowly going further down, even as she trembled. Her entire body jerked under his touch, and he'd barely even started, plus the only way he could describe the sensation on the spot was fleshy. So it was official, his brain had started failing on him. Surprised it took this long. The moment after he touched her, something wet dripped onto his finger, startling him. He paused, noting it stopping after that, just like his genital had. All right then. Panting a little, he kept up his touch, lightly and gently running over the outside best he could. Even those simple movements kept her squirming, as well as a steady stream of little sounds, which he was secretly enjoying. Soon enough, his fingers were lightly drenched, but he went on. He would instinctively know when she was about ready. He hoped. Oh. Yep, definitely felt like she was about ready, judging by his dripping fingers, which he quickly wiped on an off corner of the bedsheets. Hey, their data would be gone by tomorrow. Still, that seemed to have gone by fast. Kirito. He looked up, panting, seeing how red Asuna's face was. Kiss me. What? He breathed. She gasped, eyes lidded, her arms slowly coming up over his shoulder blades. I want to, she whispered, a little out of breath, pulling himself closer. I want to hold you close. While you, even not finishing that sentence, while you easily gave him the idea, embarrassingly so. And how he deny her now? He leaned forward, breathed once over her lips, then kissed her. Asuna, he whispered softly, holding her close, just as she was doing, and all the while, pressing their bodies together. She whimpered when their genitals touched, and he wasn't much better, using one hand to guide them while the other was in her hair. Kirito steeling himself, aiming to get it over within one stroke, he pushed forward. Ha. Whatever reaction he had, it was lost in her scream, and all he could, fuzzily, hear was her panting. But despite the wet heat, a very good reaction he suddenly never wanted to end, something still stood out even in all of that. While she was squeezing him, she wasn't. Not tight. He breathed in a rasp, without thinking. Asuna breathed out, touching his neck. No. Pain, she whispered, barely audible. He slowly looked at her, and she at him, really close, but even though they knew the answer, their brains were too fuzzy to give it. Instead, all he saw was the love and warmth in her eyes, both at him, and at the sheer sensation going through their spines every second. And he no longer cared about the answer, or that this was a virtual world, or any of that. She was here, real, right in front of him. He kissed her deeply, which she eagerly returned, even as she gasped from his hands at her breasts. And all the while, he stirred slightly inside her, sending thrills through their systems. Then he started moving. She gasped, head thrown back just a little, and her grip tightened, including her legs. He groaned at this, kissing her neck, making her cry out, and he continued to thrust slowly, making her body move underneath him. But even before he got faster, he felt her start pushing herself against him, increasing the pleasure even more. she cried, moaning as he went faster, her breasts starting to bounce. Oh, Kirito. Ahaha. He kissed her hard, enjoying the sounds she made, especially when he wrapped his tongue around hers. She pulled him even closer for that, and when they had to break apart to breathe, she nearly clamped onto his neck. He groaned, liking the way she sucked him there. And if he got a mark, who cared? He could always cover that up later if need be. Then one particularly intense thrust made her cry out, head thrown back, allowing him a near-perfect view of her bouncing chest. Oh, he was definitely enjoying that. He kept this up, with much panting, groans/moans along the way, at least until it started becoming warm. So, he wearily took that as his cue. Ah. What? It's okay, I just got her, he breathed, trying to move her leg over to the other side. She squeaked a bit at this, but she started moving as well, trying to help out. Finally, he got it, Asuna now on her hands and knees. On an instinct, he brushed her hair aside, gently pushing it over her shoulder. He wanted to see her back during this. She looked back at him, panting, cheeks red. Kirito, she breathed, wanting. He quickly leaned over, kissing her deeply, squeezing her chest, to her delight and his. And of course, he started moving immediately. Gah! He was startled when her arms nearly gave out, but she quickly recovered, panting heavily. Wow, that certainly didn't happen in fiction. At least, that he knew of. Still, she managed to keep herself up, moaning out at his fast pace, and especially when he kept squeezing her breasts. Oh. Kirito. Asuna. He breathed, which was much harder than he'd thought, and was vision blurring at the edges normal. Because of the pleasure haze, which he'd gladly keep going, he didn't how long this went on. But he did feel it when he started to approach an edge. Still thrusting, still enjoying the entire thing, his eyebrows slowly furrowed anyhow. He was fairly sure he wasn't that fast in the real world. Was this the normal pre-programmed reaction for all guys, or what? Was there any way he could change it? And what about Asuna's edge as well? He didn't have a clue, especially since he felt all of this rather than thought it out. But even as he felt it, his edge only got closer. Instinctively, his pace increased the closer he got, something that thrilled Asuna, if her own thrusts/cries were any indication. He braced himself as he got really close. But it didn't happen. His edge remained really close, and he could feel the increasing pleasure, but it would not cross. What the? Oh. Wow, she was really making this great. Then to his complete shock, Asuna stopped them this time, by planting her hands on his hips, which surprised him into that shock. Help me here, she breathed, wanting, but still soft, even as she tried to flip herself back to before. It took him a little to adjust, but he helped out too, and soon she was turned on her back again. But this time, she reached up and held him tightly around the neck. Whoa. With quite some strength, she jumped up, still inside him and now pressed against him in a sitting position. And she wasted no time at all in kissing him deeply, which he instinctively responded to. My turn, she breathed, panting. Ah. Then she gently but forcibly pushed him forward, his back hitting the bed, and Asuna adjusting on top of him. First the surprise/shock, then wait, she's doing this? And finally, whoa, this is a really great view. Kirito, she whispered lovingly, wanting, hair moving over her shoulders and hands on his chest. Asu MMPH. Wow, she was bold, or maybe she just liked it when he went MMPH. Either way, he kissed her back fiercely, wrapping his arms tightly around her back. She moaned at that, pressing herself closer to him, and starting to move herself. He groaned hard. The sensations were so great, even if they were the system's work. He kept up his grip, slamming himself inside her just as much, putting his whole strength stat into it. Oh my god. Kirito. Having pried her mouth off his, she quickly sat up, still pushing herself up and down on him. He held her up like that for a little, then he gripped her breasts hard, throwing her head back. Seriously, this was such a great view. Why hadn't they even started like this? She got faster and faster, enough that she began to outpace him. Aha, MMPH. She breathed, pulling him up, pressing herself against him. Kirito, I'm. He understood, and something deep inside told him this was faster than was possible. But at this point he didn't give a damn, because he kissed her hard, pushing her forward until her back hit the bed again. Asuna. He breathed against her neck, holding on for dear life. If only they could actually feel each other tightening down there. She cried out, moaning out repeatedly as he thrust fast, hard, deep into her. In fact, she sounded like there was trouble breathing. And yet she was loving every minute of it, if her own thrusts were any indication. And just as she screamed, his own pleasure finally unlocked, his edge, restrained by the system for the last eternity, now started acting like the real deal again. But that could only mean. She screamed deep in her throat. Kirito. Asuna. Gaoa. He just slumped, cheek planted on her chest, vision blurry, and it was really an indescribable hot wet blur down there. An indescribable hot wet blur that was drying up really fast. Some eternity later, he just managed to lift his head, which really took it out of him. Asuna lay there, hair slightly splayed across the pillows, eyes shining, and her lips open a bit. She panted heavily, unable to talk, but still perfectly conveying what she wanted. He slowly leaned forward, kissing her softly. That made her happy, eyelashes fluttering. Wait, was she getting sleepy? Her soft breathing a minute later gave him his answer. As well as when he started irrevocably drifting off. Damn. He thought, struggling. The sis. He slowly lay down beside Asuna, making sure to touch his hand to her cheek, breathing against her neck. Then the system took over. Chapter 2, Honeymoon. Sao, Ukrad. Floor 61, Asuna's house. The next day. His eyelids were heavy, instinctively fighting a 90% losing battle to get back to sleep, and his body fiercely telling him the opposite, just the usual morning routine for him. Maybe a little overboard with the description, but well, you know. Oh. He half opened his eyes, staring up at the ceiling for a while, just feeling how heavy his body was. Wait, this wasn't his pad. Where was he? Even as he pondered this question, he slowly became aware of a steady stream of breathing along his neck. Because he was still half asleep, rather than being alarmed, he just slowly looked to his right. Asuna lay facing him inches away, eyes closed, breathing in and out steadily, shoulders and a very small curve of her breasts showing. Staring at her, it wasn't long before a rush of images went through his mind. Because they were going so fast, he couldn't make sense of all the details, but he did see a tangle of arms and legs, kissing, licks, and a lot of sounds. His face slowly turned red, from his neck to his hair, and he wouldn't have been surprised if steam was literally coming out of his ears. For a while, his expression matched this color change, but strangely he stayed quiet throughout it. After at least 5 minutes, he got over it, the embarrassment being replaced by a subdued warmth. He started moving underneath the blankets, doing this utmost not to wake her, and eventually he managed it. He shivered a bit at the cold breeze, which was everywhere, then quickly found his boxers. And after a second's thought and some embarrassment, carefully laid Asuna's underwear as well beside the bed. A small ding later, he was fully dressed again, minus the coat. After that, he slowly looked over at the bedroom lamp, knowing it was still very early morning. Click. Asuna continued to breathe softly, looking so peaceful as she slept. Soon he realized he was staring again, but this time, he didn't actually want it to stop. He knew it wasn't really his style, but hey, this was a special case. Asuna was just so pretty, even he couldn't deny that. And as he looked at her, he thought about how much she must love him, and trusted him with her life. Soon an idea came to his mind. It was insane, even by his standards, and some part of him said it was too soon. They needed more time, more trust, no, love. But he knew better than that. They'd known each for 2 years, grown closer together, even if that part hadn't been obvious until recently, and they were still trapped in a death game, so every day was another chance that they could die. And maybe, Asuna knows that after tonight, he thought, this would be a foregone conclusion, just a matter of when. Plus if I took too long, she might worry that I didn't love her. Which couldn't be farther from the truth. He smiled softly, enjoying the sight of her peaceful sleeping form. And he kept that smile as he watched her for a little, before he reached out, gently touching her cheek. She stirred immediately after he did, slowly looking up at him, and she blushed, with a sweet smile. "Hey, what you smiling about?" he asked softly. "I was just having a dream. About my old life," she whispered gently. "It was weird. In the dream I had everything in Ukrad, everything that happened, and meeting you was just that, a dream. And I was so scared," she continued, snuggling in against the pillows, eyes closed. "But it wasn't. Thank God." "Now that sounds weird," he agreed, looking at her. "But, don't you want to go back?" The slightest giggle. "Then, of course I do," she said gently, her eyes soft. "I do, it's just I don't want my life here to stop either. The last 2 years have been very special to me, I realize that now." He didn't know what to say to that, so instead, he watched as she slowly sat up, hugging the sheets to her chest. It was another cliché thing, but he thought it looked cute, especially the way she did it. "Hey, listen, Kirito?" she asked, a little nervous, but still soft. "I was thinking, maybe we could leave the front lines for a while." "What?" She slowly glanced down. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I feel like if we return to the battlefield now, something bad's gonna happen again. Or maybe I'm just tired of it all." Her words perfectly matched what he'd long since felt. "I know what you mean," he said softly, slowly looking out the window. "I guess I am too." A moment or two passed by. It was now or never. "In the southwest of floor 22," he said faintly, the words harder to get out than he initially thought, "there's this tiny little village by a lake and a forest. We could get a house together, and then..." "And then what?" Glancing to the side, he struggled slightly, the last internal "are you sure?" moment. Then he breathed, looking straight at her, "We get married." Her lips opened in surprise, and her eyes began shining, hands coming together over her heart. And all this while she was giving him the sweetest, happiest smile he'd ever seen, so much so that it legitimately threatened to melt his own heart, to make him smile back with equal love, and to never forget that image for as long as he lived. He wanted to do all that, and he would. But he held out, not just yet. Her shining eyes were soon wet with tears, only adding to her happiness. "Okay," she breathed with bliss, a single one falling. It was as if a weight was lifted off his shoulders, despite all but knowing her answer. Deciding not to waste any time, he brought up his menu, and began looking through the multitude of options, all the while burning that perfect smile into his memory. It took quite a bit of searching, but eventually he found it, under the advanced settings. Marriage. Ask that special someone to be yours forever, to watch each other's backs, to live together, and to kick monster ass together for as long as the game is around. Notes: marriage in SAO is not recognized as marriage in real life, unfortunately. Both partners will share inventory space, and will be visible at all times. This decision cannot be changed or undone, except by character deletion. Both parties must agree for this to be official. Do you wish to send a marriage request? He clicked yes, found Asuna's player icon and clicked it, then clicked yes again to send it to her. When he heard the ding, he looked over at Asuna, who was shyly/nervously/happily looking at the request. "Kirito has sent you a marriage request. Do you wish to accept?" After what seemed like an eternity, though only a second in real time, Asuna clicked yes with tears in her eyes. Ding. A message appeared before him: "Asuna has agreed to your marriage request. Do you agree as well?" It read. A little redundant, he thought, but he also understood why it was asking. So, his own heart pounding, he clicked the yes button with a smile. "Congratulations. You two have been married. When's the big day?" Despite the message asking that, there wasn't an input date for the question, so he wasn't sure what to do about it. "Kirito." He looked over at her. Asuna's eyes were shining, and she had her left hand out, reaching for him. He smiled, reaching out with his own left hand, slowly intertwining their fingers together, even as he got the hint and got closer. Soon he was sitting on her right, their hands still intertwined, smiling at each other. "Should be any time now," she breathed lovingly, still blushing. She looked at their joined hands, the tear streaks still gleaming in the soft light. Even now, the system is calculating the size of our fingers, making measurements, she whispered softly, looking at him. You know, for our rings. He blinked, then smiled, looking at his fingers as well. Oh yeah, he said gently, not against it, it just hadn't occurred to him until now. At least it won't cost you anything, she said softly, with some playfulness, but mostly the first thing. He chuckled sheepishly. Even if it did, I'd pay it willingly, he breathed, meaning it. But we'll still need to pay for the house together. She smiled even more. I can't wait. Immediately after she said it, a message appeared for both of them, having, at least, dozens of options. Choose a color. He looked back at her, already knowing what it was asking. Well, you know I like black, he said mildly, squeezing her hand. But I know that might not be your favorite choice. I think you prefer white. She giggled a little. I do, but I have a better idea, she whispered softly, loving stroking his fingers a little. You remember what happens when you mix black and white? You get gray, he said easily, instinctively. A moment after that, the actual impact hit him. Oh, I see. Smiling, eyes shining, she looked at the options. You like this one? She asked, clicking an option, which then had a three-dimensional version of a gray ring appear, giving them a visual aid to help, as well as the usual "Are you sure?" Yes and no question. A little light for me, he answered, trying to move away from the much darker ones. They needed to find a good compromise. Maybe this one? He watched her decide, then she smiled. Go 2 shades to the right, and it'd be perfect, Kirito, she whispered lovingly. Looking at her choice, after some serious thought, he could only agree. All right, he breathed softly. Together, they both clicked the yes button, which furthered Asuna's blush and his smile. Soon after the click, their left ring fingers began glowing at the base, to their surprise, and they reluctantly pulled their fingers apart. The glow intensified slightly, then formed a distinct ring shape, swirling with color until it began solidifying. The result? Perfectly identical gray rings appeared, fitting snugly around their fingers. Asuna's happy tears fell again as she looked at her ring, eyes shining, lips parting in a little gasp. He gently touched her hand with his own, intentionally bumping their rings together, which sparkled slightly in the lamplight. This only made her happier, and she grasped his hand back, snuggling in beside him. He willingly held her close against him. I love you, Kirito, she whispered softly, right against his neck. I love you too, Asuna, he answered, just as soft. Let's stay together, forever. Yeah, count on it. So, Unkrad. Floor 22. That night. Breathing slowly, Kirito sat on the edge of the bed, looking across the darkened room with a smile. He and Asuna were married now, and would live here together from now on. It almost didn't seem real. But it is real, he thought mildly, still remembering how narrowly he dodged a bullet earlier today. I don't give a damn if this is a virtual world, my feelings for you are real. He touched his cheek sheepishly, then glanced at the bed to his right. I just wonder how this is gonna work, he mused to himself quietly. Will I sleep in this one, or will she want it? But he didn't have time to think about it, as he heard footsteps, so he turned around. Hey, Asuna breathed softly, hands behind her, dressed in wow. She twirled a bit, the pink nightgown moving easily with her, especially the grey edges. You like it? She asked, with a small blush. He slowly breathed out, managing a smile. It looks cute, he said gently. Is that all you have to say? She said, pretty much pouting, in that Tsunya way. His first reaction was oh crap, then to nervously babble, but he stopped himself. That was the quickest way to make a fool of himself. Breath in, breath out, then. Actually, no, he breathed faintly, a little relieved on the inside. It's more than that. Surprised, she slowly stepped closer after a moment. What do you mean? I don't just mean that it's cute, like, only the outfit's cute, even though it is, he said, paused a little on how to say this, then he smiled. It's also like you make it look cute, because it suits you. She gasped, blush turning a full-on red, and she just stared at him. He could feel his face going completely blank. What? Oh God, that must have been so cheesy, he said quietly. That was not like me at all. Very girlish giggling. He breathed, more a sound than anything. The last time he'd heard her giggle like that was shortly after Klein had called him a weasel for punching him in the balls. After she finished giggling, cheeks still red, she took his hand. No, it wasn't like you, at all, she assured, smiling as she sat down beside him, eyes shining a bit. But it was very sweet. He was massively relieved, putting his other hand with their joined ones. Good, he breathed, to no one in particular. And here I was thinking of possibly degrading myself, she said mildly. When he looked at her, confused, she glanced away. I thought that if you didn't like it, I might ask if you wanted something more form-fitting. Even showy, she continued, with a little more effort. What was I thinking? I second that, he said playfully, startling her, pulling her other hand onto the pile. Showy? That would have just made me uncomfortable, even if it was you. What, like you wouldn't want to see me like that? She asked defensively. I would, he answered with no hesitation, making her blink in surprise. But there are times and places for that. And I'd rather not have your assets overshadow the woman that I love. His answer shocked/embarrassed/pleased her, all in one go, and he could see her struggling with all of them. Finally she just looked at him, cheeks red, expression neutral. I don't know whether I should hug you or slap you for that, she said to him. He managed a sheepish sound. I likely deserve both, the latter more so, he said gently. She slowly softened. Luckily for you, I feel far more warm than angry, she whispered, gently pecking him on the lips. You care more about seeing me than my body, even with all those male instincts inside? She said, very playful before it went to soft. That means more to me than you'll ever know. Probably, he agreed, slowly leaning down on his side, their forehands still touching together. But I did mean it. I know, she whispered softly, lightly touching against the ring on his left hand. Hey, Kirito? Could I lay here with you, for a little? She asked shyly. He was pretty sure he was blushing now. I don't see why not, he said, stammering a little. Her look softened even more, probably due to how awkward he looked, which she had said looked cute. Then she leaned down. First she simply lay down beside him on his left side, before she hesitantly moved closer, snuggling in close to him. In fact, any closer and she could have been laying on him. She breathed, one hand moving slightly on his chest. You're so warm, Kirito. He smiled a little, but instead of answering verbally, he gently stroked the back of her head a little, which she liked. You know, last night was amazing, she breathed against him shyly. He almost answered it was all right, but stopped himself. A playful joke on that subject would not go well, period. It was, he answered faintly. However, I don't think it'll ever compare to the real-life version, even having no experience before last night. Her head stirred against him, almost trying to get closer. What do you mean? I mean, it did some of the work for us, he answered, pausing on his stroking. It physically held off my coming, she jerked a bit in embarrassment, until yours was ready. And also, I think every reaction, from both of us, were just the standard pre-programmed ones. There were no wild spots, I guess you could say. I'm sure you felt it too. She didn't answer for a bit, then her hand came up, brushing his cheek. I did, though I didn't put it in those words, she breathed softly, slowly lifting her head a little to look at him. He adjusted for that. But I see it a little differently. She giggled slightly, cheeks red. In here, the system recreates this act fairly closely, she whispered, really close to his lips now. In exchange for none of the drawbacks, it does some of the work for us, and keeps all the pleasure. I can see why you guys think about it so much. Us guys? He asked pointedly, but playfully. She smiled, pecking his lips. Like this, it's sorta addicting, she breathed softly. He blinked, unable to believe it. Did you just admit it's addicting, Asuna? She furrowed her eyebrows. Ah. She freaked out, entire face turning red. Literally, he could have sworn steam was actually coming out of her ears. He grinned. Oh my God, I'm gonna be holding that over you for a long time. Gaia. Not on your life.